I've never heard a colored person that was born and raised in Jackson County say anything bad about that. I've never heard a white person that's born and raised here say anything bad about it. So why does somebody want to do something bad?
To me, it's a symbol of hate. It's absolutely just a symbol of hate.
You have a problem with it? Move somewhere else or stay away from that statue.
It's somebody's artwork. So it's history. I think they should stay.
If it was all up to me, I would take the entire statue, the Confederate flag, I would take them down.
The whole intent of its location and the design is you've got the streets of Sylva, the main street, looking this way. The idea is to lead the eye upwards. There began this campaign in the newspapers started by James H. Cathy, who had served in the war, and he wanted a Civil War memorial. So he started a fundraiser. I think the statue itself ultimately cost $1,400. And the newspapers say that a crowd of 3,000 people came to Sylva for the dedication. The only reason that's possible is because of the railroad. People could arrive, they ran special trains for people to attend and to come to this dedication. And then there are photographs of the Confederate veterans posed around it. I'm sure you've seen those. Yep. One of the reasons that was being argued in the papers for having a dedication at this time is not just to celebrate Sylva's sort of coming of age, but they kept pointing out that the veterans were slowly dying off.
This is my great grandfather.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, right here. This is Thomas Monteith. He's front row and center.
To me, it's a part of history, but I can appreciate for other folks it may represent something else entirely.
I definitely consider it a historical monument.
Yeah.
Like the ones, the Vietnam War, the World War II, other historical monuments. It's not always pretty, our history, but it is our history.
North Carolina, most of the historians say, was not one of the border states, but this mountain area was, very, very much so, and even that would even extend over into eastern Tennessee and parts of Kentucky.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you believed in, whether you agreed with, whatever. Our ancestors still fought and died for this. You know, that's where we come from, you know.
Well, I'm a Southern boy. Like I say, I grew up pretty much in Webster. My father was a Southern boy. He grew up in Dillsboro. My great-grandfather fought in the Civil War with the 29th North Carolina. He went in a private and came out a private. He fought at Chickamauga, surrendered in New Orleans, and lived in Webster. He died, I think, 1926, if I'm not mistaken, at about 91, so.
Grave marking and the registration of where these men are buried and putting the military marker on them is what our job is, and to fight for heritage and see that they're not forgotten.
At extreme elevation, aim! To the left oblique, fire! Recover, arm! Shoulder, arm! Reset, arm!
The very first Confederate monuments and memorials were in cemeteries. Makes a lot of sense. They were honoring the dead who were killed during the war. And they were not nearly as ornate. They were not statuaries. They were not big massive monuments to soldiers or to generals. They were basically cemetery memorials. But basically something happened in the late 19th, early 20th century, leading up into the mid 20th century, where they started being placed in very prominent public places. And that was not by accident.
I guess I see the intention of the monuments going in around the 20s as being very particular to trying to scare off Black communities and Black residents who, at that point would have been, emancipated, but still there, and I think that a lot of people wanted them gone. And so that is part of the plan, was to put those up in order to scare people off.
It was about sending a very different message because the Confederacy was being understood and being remembered in the context of the struggle to keep and reclaim white power, particularly after Reconstruction, when white power was very much challenged by the federal government, but also enfranchised African Americans. And then later on during the Civil Rights Movement, not by accident, you started seeing a resurgence in the Confederate battle flag, a resurgence in Confederate monuments, memorials. I've seen a big resurgence in Confederate place names, the naming of schools and streets for Confederate figures. And that was not by accident either. That was during a time in which white people in control were very concerned about what was happening in terms of the country, in terms of civil rights.
My dad was not afraid. That was one thing about him that always concerned us, was that he was not afraid of anybody. And he would travel back into the hills and the mountains and work and do whatever he had to do. He was not afraid. But many people were afraid to go to Robbinsville because they knew that that sign was up. There was an actual sign up that used the N-word and said, "You better not be caught here after dark." And so we didn't realize that over in Hiawassee, Georgia, Young Harris, down into Blue Ridge and those places, that they were also sundown towns. We did not know that.
And so you had very wealthy, elite white landowners who did indeed own slaves. And maybe they didn't live there locally, but they certainly ran governments. And they were basically telling the rest of the region, telling the rest of the country, in fact, what was valued. And what was valued was, in fact, preserving the institution of slavery. And that actually becomes very relevant later on, because one of the reasons that these Confederate monuments were very popular after the war and well up into the Civil Rights Movement was, in fact, because they didn't just signal to African Americans about how things were supposed to be and what was valued historically and what was valued socially. It also signaled to white people who had been told for generations that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. The Civil War was about the fight against Northern aggression, preserving Southern heritage, Southern culture. And it as much convinced them that they were fighting for a noble cause as it was meant to intimidate African Americans. So it's a very complicated thing. It involves class, it involves race, it involves regional identity. And part of the reason it's so difficult to talk about and to figure it out is that many of the formal histories that we have and know have been told to us from a very, I think, biased perspective.
I'm proud that my great-grandfather was a soldier and that he fought. He was not a slave owner, but he fought for the wrong cause. And taking down that statue, in my opinion, would not disgrace my great-grandfather. But it gets back to all the controversy that would cause. Look at Charlottesville, This country's in enough turmoil without adding more turmoil to it right now. So I lean towards a plan B if there is one.
Yes, these statues are icons of a culture that promoted the institution of slavery. There's no doubt about that. And yet, it's a slippery slope, as I say, because we're not exactly sure where to draw the line there. If we start removing these monuments, how far do we go with this sort of thing? Because almost every monument in this country is associated in some way with ideas that are questionable.
But the other question is, what do we do about the fact that mothers, daughters, sons, fathers were in that war? What do we do about the people who are not represented, which is the African American community that was in fact enslaved in Jackson County, Georgia, all over South Carolina, all over the South Virginia, those people were enslaved, and they ended up, there's no statues for them, right? There's no statues for them. And the other thing is where do we go now?
I mean, one of the things I would point out to you that I think is one of the, and I'm not the only one who's brought this up, is that, you know, there was a real insidious manipulation of poor white people in the South that was going on during the Civil War. There was issues of neighbors and heritage and so forth, but there was also issues that, you know, many of them had no choice about going to fight in the Civil War. And in fact, they were fighting for a system that also at the same time was keeping them in poverty.
Nobody's buying flags after the Civil War. This is not a market. And then Strom Thurmond runs for the Dixiecrat ticket, and he starts flying a Confederate flag around, and all of a sudden, flag sales skyrocket. There's not really flags on top of a lot of southern state capitals until Brown versus Board of Education. So when Brown versus Board of Education gets passed, which happens to be the anniversary of the Civil War, then states like South Carolina put a Confederate flag up. And it's supposed to be temporary, and in South Carolina's case, it stayed up for, you know, about a half a century.
Part of that, to me, what's interesting about that is their whole platform was basically white supremacy, but they couched it in the language of states' rights. But if you look at all of these, and the Lost Cause, you know, folks are also big. That's the first thing that they will invoke is states' rights.
Right.
You know,
It's an old standby.
It's an old standby, but if you look into what states' rights often is just a code for the legislation of bigotry.
I mean, there's really only, for Black people, there's only one way to interpret that. I don't think there's any ambiguity in that. For white people, I think the interpretation is more confused. You know, it is, if you read the backside of it too, it talks about the mothers and how much the mothers have lost.
You know, there's a lot of reasons to say that these statues represent something wrong. But when you take them down, what are you doing? What goes in their place? We've got, basically, we recognize that statue out there represents a revisionist view of what happened in the South. Nonetheless, there's no question about it. Those men who died, those men who fought, were doing it for all the best reasons as far as they were concerned. In all honesty, I don't know the answer. Just like I don't know why there is a black man that parades periodically at Walmart with a Confederate flag and a Confederate uniform. I cannot answer that question.
A lot. Sometimes I'll just don myself in Dixie Outfield apparel or Southern Heritage 411 apparel. I put my uniform on mostly when there's a special occasion, Confederate Memorial Day, Black History Month. It just depends on how I feel. Depends on what the weather's like. It's a little warm around here today, but when you have tunnel vision, when you've been taught one thing, and basically a lie most of your life, you believe that. And most of the only thing they have to talk about is slavery. Well, the whole world was complicit in the economic institution of slavery. They gear so much and talk so much about hate. I like to deal with facts. Let's just look at this thing in the body politics. It's a lot deeper than what these people believe. Most of them don't have anything in their thinking process, and I have to catch myself all the time because you don't want to deem a man ignorant but uninformed. You know, it's easy to have newspaper knowledge and just keep hollering slavery. Slavery is a red herring in the whole process. That's just the bottom line to it.
I understand that monuments are a part of history, but I also believe that locations play a big role in withholding a viewpoint of a community. And sometimes I feel like that could speak for a community in a negative way. And especially when you go back through history and you look at what the Confederacy stood for, and regardless of your opinion of, oh, this means this or this means that, there's facts of what they stand for. And if you see that and say that it's not hate, it's history, I don't necessarily agree with that argument.
But in many cases, when we talk about places of memory, memorials, monuments, street names, building names, they're part of our surroundings. And so they operate beyond simply referencing the past. They are a way of making that past appear as if it's legitimate and ordinary and taken for granted. And so the power of place is not just that it gives visibility to those memories and those histories, but it makes it seem like it's normative. It's the normal part of the everyday scene. And so there's a real struggle not just to understand how those memories gain currency over time, but how they affect people across generations. And so if you think about, for example, how a monument or memorial can become part of one's, really almost taken for granted idea of how things are supposed to be. If you think about, for example, that people see it every day, they incorporate these spaces and places into their cultural practices, their documents, their activities, and how it becomes so much part of their identity, they often don't even question it. And by not questioning it, it's become really second nature.
I think people have become numb to it. When you see something all the time, you really don't think about it. So for me, if I'm questioned about it, yes, it should come down. Yes, it is a symbol of racism. Yes, it speaks to the stain on our history. And it is not a positive symbol for me. It's not something that I would celebrate. It's something that I would want to keep away from my children.
It's very interesting when you start talking about race and how different groups feel with each other and the undertones of racism in our communities. For a long time, I feel like people looked at Cherokees differently. Then we started making money, so now they look at us differently as well, because we get checks every 6 months, and they have this whole other attitude of what Cherokee is now. And is it because you don't have that, and that's a problem now? Because you had no problem with us when we had nothing. Well, you did have a problem with us. When we had nothing, there was still a problem.
Right.
And now there's a problem because we have stuff that you don't have. So there's the problem. There is a problem there somewhere, and I think it goes back again to the whole issue about us not having conversation about things. And if the statue allows us an opportunity to sit and talk about the issues that we face in our small communities, then great. I think the monument is now doing what it should be doing in this time.
I'm going to do a comparison maybe to what happened in Nazi Germany after the Holocaust. The answer wasn't to try to get everybody to forget what happened. The answer is never forget what happened. That we have to remind ourselves, yes, that slavery was an atrocity that took place in this country. And we don't keep that in our minds and teach that to our children by trying to forget the history. So perhaps the best way to deal with that monument is to place it in the proper context, the proper historical context, and not give it the prominence that it has today as the lone symbol on the courthouse steps that speaks to the values of this country and of the Southeast and of Sylva, North Carolina.
But because this mural is going to be up for decades, I didn't want to publicly voice an opinion one way or the other, because if it remains and I didn't include it at all, then it becomes a statement of sort of omission. If it gets taken down and it is in the mural, in that case, then the mural would be standing in opposition. And so, just for the sake of longevity, I think it was the right call to cover it, and I also felt better about that because, from my point of view, although that is a significant part of the history here, it isn't necessarily something that needs to be honored for the entire community.
So we also ask questions that other folks hadn't, where we say, hey, would you want to keep a monument up? Would you want to destroy a monument? Would you want to put a monument in a museum? Or would you want to leave it in place but contextualize it more? And what we found is that, not surprisingly, there's a big division between whites and African Americans. So white Southerners, about 50% of white Southerners want to just keep monuments as they are, kind of regardless of the type. It's about 17% of African Americans. Those numbers are fairly similar to what we see in questions about the Confederate flag that we've done in other polling work. African Americans, however, don't necessarily want to destroy the monuments. So it's like 7% of African Americans think, yeah, let's just get rid of them altogether. The plurality of African Americans that we surveyed in this poll say that they want to move the monuments to a museum. So the idea that we don't want to destroy that history, but we don't want that history to be prominent and kind of the local example, maybe not sort of sitting over the town.
That after the problems, the tragedy in Charleston with the shooting of the people in the church, and then which was the cause, I think, or the catalyst for taking down the flag off of the State House, the Confederate flag, that is. That created a pretty serious backlash that extended to this area, and I began to see for the first time in many years Confederate flags flying from the backs of pickups all over both of these counties. This whole issue of heritage and how the Confederate flag speaks to the heritage of people. The Confederate flag wasn't put up on the State House until 1962. So, it wasn't sewn into the Georgia flag until 1956. And this was, in both of these instances, was a case of trying to speak to the backlash against the civil rights movement, period.
Yeah, and now we've been to Nashville this weekend, where they have in souvenir shops playing cards with the Confederate flag,
and
t-shirts,
yeah.
And we saw a truck that had the Confederate flag behind his rear wheels. And I felt like that's really not okay.
Yeah, and the t-shirts with statements like "we don't back up" or some gun-related statements, and the Confederate flag on it. So that was pretty strange.
And I believe that it doesn't really matter if your personal opinion is that it's about something different than maybe slavery or racism. If you know that a majority of, let's say, African Americans feels offended by that, then just don't show it. That's what people in or in Europe tell you, hey, you're going to the South and
there's kind of a prejudice.
But I thought, well,
it can't be that bad,
but it was actually worse. It was worse,
When I get into conversations with people about what the Confederate flag means and does it mean this or does it stand for just Southern pride or whatever, I talk to them about what the oppressive nature of the American flag has for Native tribes.
If somebody wants to fly the flag on their property, great. If somebody wants to fly the flag on their vehicle or whatever, I do not agree with it, but as the famous quote, but I would defend to my death your right to do that, 100%. But when it comes to public property, that property that is owned by all of us can be representative of all of us.
If you think about it, those flags that are now flying across that highway are sending a signal almost as a form of intimidation about, well, this is what we believe. And in fact, this is meant to not just simply state our heritage, but it's meant to influence people, maybe enrage them, maybe embolden them, but it's meant to have an effect. I mean, I think that's an important point, is that monuments and memorials are not static. They're not meant to be passive. We really need to start thinking about the power of those symbols. When I see the power about them, not just who creates them, but the power of how those symbols affect the way people feel. That's actually something that scholars have not looked at a great deal. We talk about it, but we never really have studied it in a great deal of detail exactly how symbols affect people, how they make them feel like, well, at home, or how do those same symbols make people feel like they're strangers in their own town.
There was even a place over in Haywood, in Hayesville area, that was called the N-word. I can say it, but I don't like it repeated. Niggerhead bald is what it was called. And not very long ago, in the 90s, the state of North Carolina, the legislature decided they would like to remove all these negative names that were on these places, these locations in North Carolina. And even then, there was a representative who said, I don't see anything wrong with that. We should leave it that way. So I guess that compares to what we're saying about Confederate statues and memorials to the Confederacy. He couldn't see anything wrong with it, but there are other people, like our people, who are really denigrated by the fact this is horrible to see names like that and know that it was putting us down.
I grew up in Waynesville, North Carolina, but my mother grew up here in Sylva, Chipper Curve Road, but then it was called Tannery Flats. My grandmother lived here all her life. She was a cook in the black school when schools were segregated. I spent my summers here and my weekends here. And I'm out here today reaching back to my roots, trying to see where my people may need some help. The African American community that I grew up in, or I came here every summer and every weekend, is like just filtered away. I would say 60% of the homes that are owned by the black people as I was growing up are now empty, or they belong to real estate. And a lot of the people went to school and moved away because there's no jobs, there's nothing going on. All the black people worked at Western Carolina University in the cafeteria or in the dorms as janitors. That's where they were. Now, as times changed and we become educated and realize we're not going to work in the cafeteria and we're not going to clean rooms. And there's nothing wrong with cleaning bathrooms and rooms, because that's how a lot of us got where we are today, from our forefathers doing that. But when we realize we can get an education and do better, we were sort of pushed out of the area. It's just, stay in your space, more or less. Not say it out loud, but more or less saying you stay in your lane. So in order for a black person to succeed, they had to leave Jackson County. And that's real. That's not, I'm not making that up. That's just the way it is.
I moved here in 2002. The kids was wearing Confederate flag clothes to school. The young people with cars and trucks was driving around the school with Confederate flags flying. They put pictures of Ku Klux Klan with black people hanging up a tree on my children's desks. They put a hangman or noose on his door, on my son's locker door. I had this conversation with the Board of Education. Well, I took it all the way to EO in Washington, D.C. The only reason they made some changes is because when they said to me, they gave me a lawyer when they said, Mrs. Moore, do you want to sue the Jackson County School Board? When they said that, then they started to do something about it.
We have a country and a nation and a region that's really never come to terms with its history of race relations. And so that's a much larger project that has to be taken on. And that's been one of my arguments, is that we've got to actually combine issues about symbols with issues of memory work. And memory work is this process, this labor of coming to terms with painful past, and the work of coming to terms with the role of racism. And that is not solved by simply removing a monument or memorial. Now, monuments and memorials are important to it, but there has to be larger range of discussions, policies, and really commemorative work that goes well beyond just simply a monument.
In the 1990s, when some of these discussions about monuments were starting to really hit the national media, but on the South Mall there are a number of statues related that are depictions of Confederate generals. So the student body was saying, we want to remove these. And the administration said no. The solution they came up with was what they called counterpoint monuments. And so they had a monument of Martin Luther King Jr. Built and then placed on the East Mall of the campus. But there was still a lot of outcry from the students that continued throughout the 1990s. So then they put up another what they call counterpoint monument of Cesar Chavez, and I think that's I think that was in front of the tower, and then finally, most recently, they just had them removed.
History has been erased already. You know what I mean? Yes, that statue is up, but people forget, that there's no statues really in the South that commemorate Union and people in the North that fought for, slavery to be abolished.
I feel like if we did tear it down, the history would be lost, just like our history is. You know what I mean? Two wrongs don't really make a right.
This issue and blanketly calling for it to be removed, I'm not sure that's the right answer. I mean, personally, I would love to see that statue removed, right? But I think that you have to be conscious of the consequences of your actions.
If you take these monuments and you put them in a museum, or you take them away, it's like taking the flag off the State House because of what it says about the state. If you take the monuments and put them in museums or put them in other places, then you change the context. And now you're making it more about history, truly about history, and about education than about making a statement.
For me as a geographer, it really speaks volumes about how these monuments are not just about controlling the past and controlling how we talk about the past and what gets commemorated and what gets memorialized. It's also a control of space and place. That in fact there's something much more than just simply saying, well, this is my heritage and you can't touch it. It's really much more about, well, I have power over how the landscape looks and you can't touch that. In other words, you can't have a place at the table to discuss and to perhaps change the power that state leaders and others in authority hold over the way our surroundings look, the way our symbols and our communities look and feel to us. There's something much deeper about those laws and those ordinances than simply the fact that they stop a vote or they stop change. They signal something very important about the lack of public access.
There was no fighting, no violence, and in the end there was a compromise. So the county commissioners decided to cover that with a plaque that acts as a memorial to those who died during the Civil War from Jackson County. which I think is certainly more appropriate. I think it's important that people come to Jackson County, they see that we are not worshiping this myth of the lost cause.
The new inscriptions that were recently added at the bottom of the monument to honor Jackson County veterans of all wars and E pluribus unum, to me, mean absolutely nothing due to the first inscriptions you see at the top of the statue. Those words across the bottom don't change the true intent of the statue, nor the divisiveness of having a Confederate monument as your, what I would call, welcome to Sylva mascot.
I've not been close to this Confederate statue since it was modified. I was, though, part of Jackson County's NAACP branch, as we collaborated with the town of Sylva a year or two ago to host a touring sculpture of Harriet Tubman. From many locations downtown, you could look one way and see the Confederate statue, and then turn just the opposite way and see Tubman. So anybody who was there in Sylva, we bore witness to more than one version of history.
At the bottom, it says E pluribus unum, which means from many one, which is what America is supposed to be. We're a nation of people from all nations. That's what makes us up. That is America. It's an idea. And I think it's appropriate for Jackson County, too, because there are people in Jackson County now from all over the country and all over the world. People come here. It's a very diverse place now.
I think this county and this country need a peaceful resolution. And we could reach that ideal by listening to each other's stories and histories.
She said, how did we get here? Some kind of magic in the air. He said, hush, look up there. The big blood red moon is in the air. She said, I will show no fear. Together we could watch it yield. He said, I think it's very clear we should not be here.